South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, since taking office, has emphasized that he will make South Korea a global pivotal state. And as he participated in ASEAN and G20 summits in Southeast Asia in the past few days, was his trip successful in ensuring that South Korea can be a leader at a time of global crises? Let's connect with Professor Hans Schattle from Yonsei University. Good morning, Professor. It's always good to see you.
Good morning, Do-yeon. Good to see you, too.
Well, the president's multilateral summit follows an appearance at the UN General Assembly, which may not have been viewed as entirely successful. Do you think he performed better this time around with a number of sideline talks, including ones with US, Japan, and China?
Okay, there are a couple of ways to evaluate this, Do-yeon, both in terms of international diplomacy and then, of course, in terms of the domestic reception and domestic public opinion. Certainly, these two meetings, the G20 summit and the ASEAN summit as well, were more eventful. On the sidelines of the ASEAN meetings in Cambodia, of course, Yoon met with U.S. President Joe Biden as well as Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. And of course, he's advancing what's being called an Indo-Pacific strategy, in a sense, by talking about the notion of an Indo-Pacific partnership. What that does, in effect, is it puts the country, it kind of tilts South Korea a little bit more now in the direction of the United States in the ongoing strategic competition on this part of the world with China. And it also seems to put Korea more in the position of the United States in trying to find alternative supply chains for the global economy to the Chinese. So you can imagine that this must have been a very tricky balancing act. It would be for any South Korean president, because President Yoon also, of course, met on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Bali with Xi Jinping, and I would have loved to have been in the room. That was a closed-door meeting, and there was some criticism for the extent that it was closed to the press, but it would have been very interesting to hear what the two leaders were saying in private, because I'm sure President Xi from China had some harsh words for President Yoon about the extent that Korea is, in a sense, taking sides somewhat in the direction of the global economy and the direction of the U.S. However, Yoon was successful in getting some comments, at least it's been reported here, from Xi regarding North Korea, although we'll see to what degree the Chinese government reports the contents of that summit domestically in their own press and tries to take a stand with the South in terms of applying some continued pressure on the North over its nuclear and missile tests. Now, domestic public opinion, however, that's like the other part of how you evaluate an international summit of this nature. And here, I think President Yoon's still got a tougher road ahead of him because of some steps that the presidential office took in terms of banning the journalists from NBC from the presidential plane. And that, in effect, kind of dredges up again the backlash against that and the perceptions that press freedom has been compromised here. That also has the effect of bringing back the gaffe that happened at the summit in New York, in which President Yoon at the UN General Assembly meeting was caught on an open mic with some off-color comments. In a sense, if he really wanted to put that behind him, there probably should have been, just universal access on the press plane instead of having this kind of retribution against a news organization that brings this issue back into the domestic public agenda. So domestically, there's still some contention on how this was handled. Internationally, however, there was a lot that was covered.
Right. Now, I want to talk to you about a point where he made that's not getting enough media attention. He spoke of his plans to expand official development assistance. South Korea has long been participating in ODAs across the world. What does his plan to expand actually mean? Is this a timely move considering where South Korea is right now in the global stage?
I think certainly here, because there was a 14% increase, if I understand the information correctly, in the country's commitment to ODA, to official development assistance. Now, this, of course, still has to go through the National Assembly. I think it's not yet approved. But there's been growing, of course, participation on the part of South Korea as a net contributor in development aid for a good period of time now. And I think the time is probably right for that commitment to be increased. So this suggests that South Korea is increasingly taking, a sense of responsibility on the global stage to help lift more societies and more people around the world out of poverty. So this is a very positive development, and we'll see how it proceeds, and we'll see how the government goes about it.
And that kind of goes along with his way of speaking against global protectionism, right? This is a way of showing his motivation to advance South Korea on a global stage in representing other countries as well.
Right. I think in this case, you have President Yoon fighting for the country's livelihood here, because right now, as we see in the West, there's been a trend against economic globalization, as in, fully open international trade. We hear the talk about deglobalization and, a greater emphasis on, say, the U.S., in its case, trying to bring jobs back home, so to speak. And, this is one area where both former President Trump and current President Joe Biden in the U.S. agreed. Both presidents have had this push. Whereas South Korea, its economy depends, as an export-intensive country, on maximum economic globalization and minimum impediments on free trade. And the auto industry in particular has been disadvantaged in recent months by some recent legislation in the U.S. So any president for South Korea really had to speak up on that regard. And in a way, Korea is a little bit out of sync with the way the wind is blowing in the global economy. So anything that can be done to assert the country's national interest in that respect is going to be very important.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your insights. I'm afraid we are out of time now, but I hope you have a great day, Professor.
You too, Dayan. Thank you for having me. Take care.